Thank you, Neha. Am I audible?
Yes, perfectly fine.
So I need to share my screen again.
Yes, please.
Okay. A very good evening, everyone. I'm sorry for the technical glitch which led to the delay. So I'll be talking on ERAS protocols today. ERAS, as you all know, is enhanced recovery after surgery. So in this COVID era, as you all would agree with me that change is the new norm, so is the adoption of ERAS in all the surgical specialties. Enhanced recovery after surgery is an evidence-based multimodal perioperative protocol which focuses on stress reduction and promotion of the return to the normal function. So basically, ERAS, what it does is it challenges the strong traditional beliefs which are there, like we all have been doing this since ages. NPO from midnight, mechanical bowel preparation, all the surgeons were very fond of mechanical bowel preparation. They use nasogastric tubes have been used widely across all the surgeries. Use of drains was rampant, and prolonged fasting in the perioperative period was a common thing. And mobility used to be restricted. That is, patient used to be ambulatory after a long time after surgery. So senior surgeons always had this traditional beliefs which were assumed as dogmas. That is like, for example, keeping the patient NPO from midnight, mechanical bowel preparation before any kind of surgery, especially for bowel surgery, and keeping nasogastric tube for a long time post-operatively. These intended to prevent intraoperative gut contamination, peritoneal contamination, to empty the bowel and to prevent any easy early passage of the bowel content through the anastomotic suture, so as to promote the anastomotic healing. These were the traditional beliefs. So what ERAS did was it was basically a paradigm shift in the perioperative care of the patients. It re-examined these dogmas, and it replaced them with the evidence-based best practices. So it is a comprehensive protocol which covers all aspects of patient journey through the surgical process. So ERAS basically fulfills the standard discharge criteria earlier due to an accelerated postoperative phase. And it is not that ERAS protocol does provide early recovery just by lowering the threshold for hospital discharge, as you will see as we go along the presentation. So ERAS, it all started by when Professor Henry Caleb in 1990s, he promoted this concept of enhanced recovery programs or fast track programs to enhance the patient recovery after surgery. And it became the important focus of perioperative management. It began from colorectal surgery, and it expanded to all surgical specialties, including vascular surgery, thoracic surgery, gynecological oncosurgery, even orthopedic surgery and radical cystectomy. These all societies, they have adopted ERAS protocols with wholeheartedly, with open arms. So these programs attempted to modify the psychological and physiological responses of the patient to any kind of major surgery. So Kalat, he in this paper in 1997 on multimodal approach to control post-operatively pathophysiology of rehabilitation, he described that the central culprit for an unsuccessful outcome after surgery was basically a stress response. And he conducted a surgery using a multimodal approach to reduce the stress response and enhance the patient recovery. So this ERAS protocol, by application of ERAS protocol, Kalat was able to discharge his patients 2 days after colorectal surgery, whereas in other center at the same time, the average stay of the patient post-operatively used to be around 5 to 10 days. So he was able to save these many days, and this much of financial implication also was there in earlier patient recovery. And though his colleagues also tried the same but could not reproduce the same results. So what happens during surgery, during any kind of surgery, there is a stress response which is mounted in the body in response to the inflammation due to surgery. There is a release of various kind of hormones all across the body, and there is then increased catabolic response in the body due to the surgical inflammation. Beginning from the hypothalamus, there may be a pyrexia in the perioperative period. The pituitary releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, antidiuretic hormone. Adrenal gland releases aldosterone, cortisol, adrenaline. All these are basically catabolic hormone which increase catabolism and protein breakdown. In kidney, it leads to increased renin-angiotensin system activation, sodium reabsorption, decreased potassium reabsorption, and decreased urinary volumes perioperatively. And then in pancreas, there is a decreased secretion of the anabolic hormone, which is insulin, whereas there is an increased secretion of the glucagon, which all result in hyperglycemia and muscle breakdown. Skeletal muscle, there is a muscle breakdown and release of amino acid into the circulation. In bone marrow, there is impaired red cell production and decreased response to the anemia. And in cardiovascular system, as we all are aware, the stress response is mounted and manifested by sympathetic activation, which results in tachycardia, hypertension. Then in liver, there is glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, lipolysis, ketone body production, and acute phase protein release. And at the site of injury, it manifests as inflammation, edema, and increased blood flow and afferent nerve stimulation. So basically, the hormones which are increased include ACTH, cortisol, growth hormone, insulin-like growth factor, ADH, glucagon. These all are primarily catabolic hormones, whereas anabolic hormone like insulin are inappropriately reduced. And there is mobilization of substrate in response to stress response, that is glucogenolysis, skeletal muscle breakdown, lipolysis and all. Overall, there is a reduced ability to control and respond to hyperglycemia in the body, and there is utilization of the alternative compounds as substrate like ketone bodies. So surgical stress response and recovery, how the things which affect the perioperative recovery. The recovery is delayed by presence of anxiety and fear, preoperative organ dysfunction, surgical stress response, hypothermia, nausea, vomiting, ileus, starvation, hypoxemia, sleep disturbance, drains, presence of drains, nasogastric tubes and all. Whereas if the patient is preoperatively well informed and psychologically prepared, and there is optimal physiological optimization of the physiological dysfunction, nutritional deficits have been corrected, smoking or alcohol abuse has been controlled, neuraxial blockade is provided, minimally invasive operations are conducted, normothermia is maintained, nausea, ileus prevention, all these things lead to a faster and accelerated recovery. So there are various interventions which are proposed to control the stress response. Basically, these target at the level of central level, where it decreases the release of the anabolic hormones, and at the peripheral level, where at the level of trauma inflammatory mediators, it reduces the inflammatory mediator response. Heat loss is prevention, minimally invasive surgery, pain elevation, high dose opioid or neural blockade, pain elevation. All these things are aimed at reducing the surgical stress response and thereby accelerating the patient recovery. So why ERAS is a good thing for the patient? See, after surgery, there is always in traditional care, as we discussed earlier, there is a decreased and a fall in the patient's functional status. After the surgery, there is always bound to be a fall in the patient's functional status. And in the traditional care, it was found to take weeks or months to get back to the preoperative functional status. But when ERAS is applied with the multimodal ERAS interventions, it has been seen that the functional status is already taken to a higher baseline level. From the lower baseline level, it is already taken to a higher baseline level. And after surgery, there is a smaller dip in the functional level, and it returns to the baseline level at a much faster pace. So it has been seen that it reduces the care time by as much as more than 30% or more than 2 days, even after a major abdominal surgery. And it reduces complication up to 50%. So this much is the impact of application of ERAS. So ERAS is basically has 3 main pillars, that is evidence-based perioperative care processes, multimodal and multidisciplinary teamwork, and a continuous audit of the process. So these are basically the arms of ERAS. As we will go further, we will discuss each of them. So traditionally it was described for the colorectal surgery, but it has been adopted for more or less all surgeries. It applies the same. There are some pre-operative arms, there are some intraoperative interventions, and there are some post-operative interventions. So all of them have been seen to benefit the patient. So implementation of the ERAS, it needs a teamwork, not a single person. It may be the anesthetist, it may be the surgeon, it may be the theater staff, dietitian. They all, any single person cannot be wholly responsible or be effective in its implementation. It has to be a teamwork between the nurses, dietitian, beginning from physiotherapists, occupational therapists, pain team, theater staff, anesthetic surgeon, hospital team. Everyone has to be motivated to apply it. So the ERAS team, there has to be, if you want to implement it, there has to be a team which needs to be formed at the outset. Then there needs to be a formation of protocol. Then there needs to be a discussion of various concerns of various members, and needs to be a plan which needs to be formed for an individual institution. Then it has to be applied to the patient care, and then there has to be a continuous feedback and audit to find out its effectiveness and whether it is leading to any kind of harm to the patient. So these guidelines from ERAS Society recommendations, these were released in 2018. There are pre-operative interventions, there are intraoperative and post-operative intervention. So we will see how each item affects the patient's recovery and how it has to be applied. So these are the pre-admission items, and there is a weak and a strong. This yellow is the weak recommendation and blue is the strong recommendation. It includes adequate patient information, patient pre-operative medical optimization, prehabilitation, nutritional optimization, anemia screening, then prevention of PONV, then selective pre-medication, that is avoidance of pre-medication in most of the cases, prophylactic antibiotics, avoiding any bowel preparation, maintaining euvolemia, and fasting should be minimized and carbohydrate load should be provided. So pre-operative information and education and counseling. Basically, every patient should be given a detailed information about the procedure before the surgery and the anesthetic procedure. It will diminish the fear and anxiety, and it has been found to improve the post-operative outcomes by enhancing the recovery and quickening the hospital discharge. If all the patients should be counseled, and there should always be a shared decision making between the caretakers and the patient. Patient expectation should be clear, and then specifics of how ERAS will be implemented should be clarified. Then clear specific instruction about the patient mobilization perioperatively, dieting, and the diet in the preoperative and the postoperative exercise. All these things should be made clear during this preoperative information session, counseling session. The patient should be set up a daily target to achieve, and then verbal and written information should be provided. Prehabilitation is basically a process of enhancing an individual's functional capacity by enabling him to withstand a forthcoming major stressor like a major surgery. So prehabilitation is a multimodal approach when it encompasses a preoperative medical optimization, preoperative physical exercise to build up the patient's stamina and muscle power, and nutritional support and anxiety and stress reduction. So preoperative optimization, medical optimization should always be done to whatever level is possible before surgery, which has been shown to improve the outcome and fasten the recovery. There are certain risk stratification criteria which all of us are aware of, like P-POSSUM scores, perioperative physiological, and this operative variable score. This is a very good score. Then Lee's index we all are using for predicting perioperative cardiac complication. Then these are certain general tests. Then CPET, cardiopulmonary exercise testing, is coming in a big way. So all these things should be used. Patient should be informed about the risk stratification should be done using these, and the patient should be informed about the risk. Is reduced and the recovery process is enhanced. The patient is taken from a preoperative baseline to a higher preoperative baseline status. And then when the operative procedure occurs, there is a dip in the functional status. And then this dip, the patient quickly restores from the dip in the functional status in the ERAS pathway by application of the multimodal interventions. Preoperative training as muscle strengthening exercise. This is another very useful aspect which has been shown to fasten the patient recovery. The patient should be instructed to exercise daily, that is walking for 1 to 2 kilometers per day or bicycling for up to 30 to 45 minutes. Practicing deep breathing exercises improves the functional capacity of lungs, and yoga and pranayam have been seen to do the same. Inceptive spirometer can be advised to use 3 times a day and at least 25 breathing exercises per time. Then smoking is another thing which has been seen to delay the recovery of the patient, and the patient should always be instructed and encouraged to stop smoking at least 4 weeks before the surgery. There is a cure program which addresses the same, that is using a patient conversation with the patient, understanding the patient's level of addiction, replacing the patient's existing level of addiction with the nicotine supplements, and then referring the patient to the experts. Then preoperative nutritional support. The patient should be screened for nutritional status, and those at risk of undernutrition should be given active nutritional support. A low body mass index was a significantly better predictor of postoperative mortality risk than cardiopulmonary exercise testing. So you can see that how important it is to make the patient achieve a good BMI prior to starting the surgery. And a thin and a nutritionally deficient patient nutrition should always be addressed. So there is a famous quote, "We are what we eat." So basically, it has been seen that 2 out of 3 patients coming for GI surgery are malnourished at the time of surgery. Those patients who are malnourished have 3 times more complication at the time of surgery, and they are 5 times more likely to die than well-nourished patient. However, only 1 in 5 patients coming to the hospital have 1 in 5 hospitals have a formal screening process for the nutrition, and 3 out of 4 surgeons believe that perioperative nutritional delivery will reduce the complication. And obviously, it has been seen to save so many amount of money on hospital cost if it is applied. However, still, despite this, only 1 out of 5 patients receives any kind of perioperative nutritional interventions. So how it is done? First of all, we will screen the patients for any kind of nutritional deficiency. So that how that will be done? At first step, we will see the patient's BMI. If the BMI is found to be less than 18.5 or less than 24 patients who are more than 65 years, then at step 2, we will assess the patient's weight score. If there has been an unplanned weight loss of more than 10% in past 6 months, in step 3, we will see if the patient has been eating less than 50% of the normal diet in the preceding weeks. If answer to any of these is yes, and or the albumin serum albumin is found to be less than 3, then this patient needs to be referred to the preoperative nutritional clinic or dietitian intervention. This is known as the PONS score, preoperative nutritional screening tool. So preoperative nutritional screening is essential. And remember, protein calories are much more important because building the muscle mass is more important than any kind of calories. Patient should be kept fasting for as little time as possible preoperatively, and post-operatively feeding should be started as early as possible. All oral nutrition should always be, nutritional supplements should be considered. Oral should be considered before enteral, and that should be before parenteral, and it should be a teen process. So preoperative nutritional pathway consists of the patient is scheduled for the surgery, and there is a patient is given oral intervention, and then the patient if the patient is found to be at low nutritional risk, the patient then is scheduled for the surgery. But the patient who is assessed for PONS and found to be PONS positive, that is the score is high, and the albumin is less than 3, then the patient undergoes any nutritional intervention. Then patient scheduled for surgery and PONS assessment and albumin is found to be at high nutritional risk. Then the patient is sent for preoperative nutritional clinic visit, and per oral intake is encouraged, and then enteral or parenteral as whichever suits, whichever is feasible is recommended. And then the patient weekly calls are made to the patient to update regarding the weight, and this diet is continued. And then after a month, there is a checkup or visit and reassessment of the albumin and the weight. And this we see and assess that the patient is ready for the surgery. If the weight has been gained or stabilized and there is an improvement in the albumin trend and improved nutritional assessment, the patient is posted for surgery, and post-operatively 7 days also again the patient restarted on the supplements. Then if the patient is found to be at high nutritional risk, even at 1 month visit the patient has a continued loss and evidence of worsening nutritional status, we need to check for other weight loss etiology like increasing tumor burden or infection, and communicate with the primary surgeon regarding the urgency of the surgery. Then another intervention which has been found to be improving the outcome is preoperative carbohydrate loading. It has been found to decrease insulin resistance, which is an important cause of post-operative complication. It has been found to increase in the carbohydrate uptake and utilization and storage. There is a decreased protein breakdown and catabolism, and there is a promotion of the anabolic state in this after this glucose loading. And it had been found in various studies to decrease the length of stay, decrease insulin resistance, and decrease the loss of lean body weight after the surgery. And obviously, it improves the patient discomfort, thirst, anxiety, and fatigue. So what is the recommendation? The patient should be fasting for 6 hours to solid, as is the standard recommendation, but not after midnight. Then clear fluid should be allowed till 2 hours prior to the surgery. Then clear carbohydrate rich drink like maltodextrin, it is allowed. 120 grams should be administered orally night before surgery and 2 to 3 hours prior to the surgery. And in diabetics, the carbohydrate treatments can still be given along with the diabetic medication. Bowel preparation. What is the effect of bowel preparation? It definitely leads to patient's dehydration. Preoperatively, the patient would be in hypovolemic state, and then intraoperatively, there is a higher chance of patient going into hemodynamic instability. It has in fact been found to increase the spillage of the bowel content, and it has been found to prolong the ileus, post-operative ileus, which is an important reason for post-operative increased length of stay. And it has been found to be of no added benefit regarding the anastomotic leak, surgical site infection, incidence of reoperation, or mortality. So there is a recommendation that mechanical bowel preparation should never be routinely required. And if clearance of rectum is required for left-sided anastomosis, phosphate enema is better. Then anemia. All patients with hemoglobin less than 13 gram% or ferritin less than 100 mics or transferrin saturation less than 20% should be considered for IV iron therapy as per the ERAS guideline for thoracic surgery. Pre-anesthetic medication, pre-medication like benzodiazepine, they have been found to retard the psychomotor retardation for first 4 hours of surgery and thereby delay the recovery. So they are not routinely recommended prior to the surgery. However, short-acting IV drugs like midazolam have been not found to significantly delay the recovery. Thromboembolic prophylaxis is another strong recommendation. Mechanical prophylaxis like compression stocking and DVT pumps have been found to prevent venous stasis, and all patients should be wearing it. Low molecular weight heparin has been found to prevent thrombosis, and it should be prescribed. Then extended prophylaxis should be considered for select group of patients like those on corticosteroid, comorbidities, those with hypercoagulable states, malignancy, or previous pelvic surgeries. And in this case, the LMWH will be prescribed for 28 days. Incidence of symptomatic DVT in colorectal surgery without thromboprophylaxis is as high as 30%, with fatal pulmonary embolus in up to 1% of subjects. So this is very important. Then we come to the antimicrobial prophylaxis and skin preparation. So routine prophylaxis which should be covering aerobic and anaerobic organisms should be administered 30 to 60 minutes prior to incision. A repeat dose should be provided if the procedure lasts more than 4 hours or there is a major blood loss. Then skin preparation should be recommended with chlorhexidine alcohol, and hair clipping is found to be associated with fewer surgical site infection rather than razors. Then we come to the intraoperative interventions. It include formulating a standard anesthesia protocol, which can lead to faster recovery, promoting normovolemia, normothermia, promoting minimally invasive surgery and avoiding any drainages. So there is a tri-modal approach to anesthesia, providing good analgesia, hemodynamic stability intra-op, adequate but not restricted IV fluid. So standard anesthesia protocol, the recommendations are short-acting induction agent like propofol is preferred. Short-acting opioids like fentanyl, alfentanil infusions can be used. Short-acting relaxants, which should be titrated with neuromuscular monitoring. And inhalational agent like CO, desflurane, which are faster, which provide faster recovery. With TIVA, both can be used in a similar way. Then laparoscopy and minimally invasive surgery. Laparoscopic surgery is definitely recommended for promoting a faster recovery if the expertise is available, because it reduces post-operative immunosuppression, it reduces the complications, and it definitely reduces the hospital stay of the patient, as has been shown by the various studies across. So now coming to the PONV, post-operative nausea and vomiting, the prophylaxis has been found to reduce the surgical stress, and it is routinely recommended for all patients, and it should be multimodal if the AFL scores is more than or equal to 2 risk factors. What are the AFL score? Female gender, non-smoker, history of PONV, and total post-operative opioids. So all these interventions, they are found to promote the post-operative nausea vomiting. Then therapy should always be provided in case the patient suffers from PONV, and it should be multimodal. Then nasogastric tube drainage. What is its effect? It has been found to lead to fever, atelectasis, pneumonia in patients where it is used for a prolonged period. And bowel function returns earlier if the decompression is avoided. So the recommendation is to avoid it. Preventing intraoperative hypothermia. So hypothermia, as we all are aware, that it always delays the recovery of the patient by various mechanisms. So hypothermia increases the bleeding, it increases the wound infection, and it also leads to adverse cardiac events. So systematic warming 2 hours prior and after to the surgery should be used by active measures like forced air warming. And temperature should always be monitored, and titrated warming and prevention of hyperthermia is equally important. So perioperative fluid therapy, intraoperative fluid guided therapy should be used to optimize the cardiac output. The guided fluid therapy has been found to improve the outcome, and use of non-invasive measures like stroke volume variance. These all have been found to promote the provide a good perioperative fluid control. Esophageal Doppler device, targeted fluid on individual basis. These all are the options, but CVP is not there for fluid guidance. And we should always remember that patient who is hypotensive but is normovolemic, we should not keep on infusing lot of fluids, which has been found to promote gut edema and leads to delayed recovery. We should go for vasopressors to maintain the blood pressure. And post-operatively, as early as possible, enteral route should be reinstituted. So IV fluid type, various type of fluids have been found to affect the electrolyte balance. So balanced crystalloid are the recommendation. Flow measurements, high risk surgeries like comorbidities, surgeries where patient has comorbidities, the loss is expected to be more than 7 ml per kg. We need to use a flow measurement, and modalities like esophageal Dopplers are promoted to optimize the cardiac output. So goal-directed fluid therapy would be optimal in these cases. And normovolemic patient, we should use vasopressors to maintain the BP unless there is a hypovolemia, and especially in hypovolemic patient and patients with poor contractility. So goal of perioperative fluid therapy is to maintain fluid homeostasis, avoiding fluid access and organ hypoperfusion. Avoid fluid access leading to perioperative weight gain. We should always try to target a perioperative near zero fluid balance, and there should not be a weight gain of more than 2.5 kgs at any cost. Now coming to analgesia, epidural analgesia and local nerve blocks have been found to improve the outcome. open colorectal surgery should get epidural analgesia at the beginning of the procedure, and it should be maintained for 48 to 72 hours. Local anesthesia with low dose of opioid is preferred. And the patients, however, we should be careful that equipment like PCA, which interfere with the patient mobilization, should be avoided. It should be a this thing, a disposable kind of thing, which does not interfere with patient's mobilization. Then laparoscopic resection for colorectal surgery can also be given epidural analgesia to provide analgesia. But spinal analgesia and peripheral nerve blocks like TAP blocks, interfacial blocks, they are the alternative. Then post-operative items include avoidance of any gastric drainage, providing multimodal analgesia, thromboprophylaxis, fluid normovolemia, avoiding urinary catheterization or any kind of drains, prevention of hyperglycemia post-operatively, which is very common. Post-operative nutrition should be also be targeted. We should not only target the pre-operative nutrition and then forget the patient in the post-op. This ERAS is a comprehensive protocol which follows the patient up till the full recovery. So we have to ensure that the patient gets back to his previous functional status early, and early mobilization should be encouraged. So mid-thoracic epidural analgesia has been found to prevent ileus, and it should be routinely provided. Fluid overload and nasogastric decompression has been found to delay the GI function, and it should be avoided. Oral magnesium and albumin have been seen to stimulate the GI function, and it has been found to be beneficial for prevention of ileus. And chewing gum has also been found to enhance the motility, and it has also been included as one of the modalities. Post-operative ileus is one important reason of patients' post-operative prolonged stay. So it should be avoided, and we should know how to manage and diagnose such cases. So there is a IFEED scoring system. IFEED means I is for intake, F is for feeling nauseated, E is for emesis, and then E again is for examination of the patient for any kind of distension with tympani or without tympani. Then duration of the symptom, whether it is less than 24 hours, up to 72 hours, or more than 72 hours. Based on this score, the patient is given a score of 0 to 2, which is normal, 3 to 5, which is post-operative GI intolerance, or more than 6, which is post-operative GI dysfunction. So basically, no guts, no recovery. So the patient should be get back to the normal gut function as soon as possible, so as to promote the normal oral intake. So the patient IFEED scoring is done. Then the patient is, these all are the intervention which we will come to later, like avoiding routine use of nasogastric tubes, maintaining euvolemia, minimizing opioid intake, avoiding mechanical bowel preparation, then employing minimally invasive surgery, albumin, strategic PONV prophylaxis, and immediate return to paroral intake, coffee and chewing gum. All these strategies have been found to promote the intake. But if still the patient develops POGD, then we have to treat it according to the severity. The more the severe, the more the patient will need these kind of interventions. The patient needs to be nasogastrically decompressed. Ambulation should be encouraged. Euvolemia and electrolyte repletion should be done. Like hypokalemia will promote ileus. Then gum chewing can be encouraged. And then if it still persists, we can go for imaging studies. So basically, if the patient has a normal gut function, that is IFEED score of 0 to 2, standard measures like risk-based PONV prophylaxis treatment and early feeding are sufficient. But if GI intolerance is there is difficulty in oral intake, belching, nausea, bloated feeling, then we can provide antiemetics and clear liquid diets and resume normal diet as early as tolerated. In POGD, then patient is intolerant of any kind of oral intake. There is a bilious vomiting, abdominal distension. The score is more than 6. Then nasogastric tube should be avoided. IV fluid should be nasogastric tube may need to be inserted to decompress the stomach. Then IV fluid should be provided. Possible nutritional support should be provided in other forms, and we should consider other etiologies in these cases by ruling out any pathology by imaging studies. Now coming to a very important aspect of patient recovery, that is post-operative pain. A multimodal analgesia has always been found across the board to improve patients' outcome and fasten the recovery. it's a multimodal, multi-pronged approach has always been better, which includes non-opioids like NSAIDs, IV lignocaine, NMDA antagonists like magnesium or ketamine, opioids, gabapenteins, alpha-2 agonists. All these combined together will provide opioid sparing benefit and thereby promote the patient recovery. Then regional blocks definitely have the most important role in providing a opioid sparing or opioid free kind of anesthesia. Central neuraxial block, local infiltration blocks, then wound infiltration, continuous wound infiltration, ultrasound guided field blocks. All these can be used in various combinations wherever possible. So avoidance of opioids and use of PCM and NSAIDs is the very good strategy. PCM and NSAIDs like ibuprofen, diclofenac should be used to wherever possible. It should be always be used to provide a opioid sparing benefit. Opioids like codeine, preparation, tramadol should be reserved only for breakthrough pain. And with opioids, measures should be in place to prevent the PONV because it will be a problem. Regular antiemetics should always be prescribed with opioids. Sufficient evidence is still lacking to stop and using NSAIDs as a component of multimodal anesthesia, and it should always be used. Postoperative sugar control like hyperglycemia has been found to delay recovery and increase wound infection. So hyperglycemia should be avoided at all costs. ERAS intervention, they reduce insulin resistance and promote without hypoglycemia. So they promote normoglycemia and it should be used. And then insulin to control hyperglycemia. If there is still hyperglycemia is there, then we should use insulin to control hyperglycemia, and it should be used and while there is a careful watch for hypoglycemia. So what are the endpoints? Now we have applied ERAS, but we need to know whether it has been effective or not. So till now it has been seen that the endpoint was the patient's length of stay, hospital stay, and post-operative complication. But these can be affected. There can be a lot of confounding factors for that. So recently it has been proposed that patient-reported outcomes is a better measure because measures that come directly from the patient without interpretation from the clinician would be a better way. So patient-reported outcome measures, these include various domains like physical, pain, nausea, vomiting, all these things reported by the patient, mental, the patient level of anxiety, depression, cognitive function, then social ability to participate in social activities and roles post-operatively. So all these kind of scores have been described. So there is these kind of things are used for maintaining audit, like patient, the surgery was performed, date of operation. These are used to follow up the patient and know whether the ERAS application of the ERAS protocol has been beneficial to the patient, and also to avoid any kind of harm, to know if there is an increased rate of harm or increased rate of complication after its application. So these kind of audits are definitely important to convince your authorities also to use this routinely, and also for medical legal purpose. So all these should be in place while you plan ERAS protocol in your institute. You should also plan such kind of audits and follow up. So these kind of follow-ups are done for length of stay, ERAS compliance, complications, number of operations, and patient-reported measures. All these needs to be reported, and then compliance for each element has to be noted down, whether each element was, in how many cases it was followed. So readmission rate, it is important to remember that readmission rate after ERAS should not be more than 10%. So roadblocks, what are the roadblocks for its routine application? If it is so good, why is it not being applied even in tertiary care centers? It has not been adopted so much till now, even in Western countries. Forget about our country. So the problem lies that there are too many components. It may not be possible for individuals to spare that much of healthcare personnel and that much of manpower and material for these for the application which is needed, the resources which are needed. There is still a lack of standardization on various intervention, various prongs. There is limited resources in our developing countries, especially. There's lack of data. Still, there is a lack of data because it is not being used that freely. So there is still a lack of data. But as we keep on applying it, keep on adopting it, the data will keep on coming. And as of now, there is a good amount of data. Adherence and compliance to the protocol. Strict adherence is a limitation. It is difficult to strictly adhere to many of the components. There is logistical issue and social restraints. Then many studies incorporated only a portion of ERAS elements and not the total ERAS comprehensive protocol as such because of various hurdles. So to summarize, ERAS has been a paradigm shift in the perioperative care of the patient, how the perioperative care is delivered. There is an entire paradigm shift since the introduction of ERAS. ERAS practices have been are rapid, uncomplicated recovery after surgery with both short and long-term benefits and improving the quality of life and reducing the cost of the cost of the care. So across the board, all the studies have shown that there are certain short and long-term benefit. It improves the quality of life, it reduces the stay, and it reduces the cost, associated cost. The result rely on the new approach of teamwork and continuous audit. And it is data-driven change and of improvement. And current problems that are being discussed by ERAS proponents includes the barrier of its implementation. And I'm very sure that this kind of paradigm shift is needed in current era because we are moving towards quality care. So these kind of ERAS protocol are sure here to stay. They will be universally adopted by everyone. So to summarize again, there are certain pre-admission components, there are pre-operative components, there are intraoperative, and then post-operative component, and patient is followed up till the post discharge. The patient is followed up till the patient is fully recovered. So this is a typical ERAS flow chart. Now I come to our book, which has been recently launched, the South Asian edition of the Barash, the your very own Barash. It has been a textbook since our PG days and which we have been religiously following. The new edition has certain key features which we have specifically addressed to after looking at the deficiencies which are there in the with regard to the South Asian population and with regard to the needs and the kind of diseases, the kind of infrastructure, everything keeping all in mind. There are certain changes which have been introduced, certain chapters which have been added. So every chapter has a text to suit the examination needs of the Indian postgraduate, Indian and the Asian postgraduates, which is slightly different from the Western pattern of examination. The diseases that are prevalent in India have been given more emphasis. There are many graphs, tables, and figures which have been added for a better and clear understanding on various aspects. Various MCQs have been added after each chapter, and many examinations also are starting to include MCQs, and these MCQs will definitely help you to recheck and reflect upon your knowledge. Then key points have been mentioned as must know and desirable to know. Then recent update has been added since the release of the last edition, like in regional anesthesia chapter. There are a whole lot of regional blocks which have been introduced since the last edition. They all have been updated. And we have also added 2 chapters on onco-anesthesia and palliative care, which are very useful because onco-anesthesia is coming up as a specialty in India, and it will definitely expand. Thank you very much. And I am open to any kind of questions. And this is my email ID for later on. If you have any query, you can always address to me. Thank you very much for your patient listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gupta. This was a very informative session. I'm sure the attendees would have found this very useful. We're now open to questions. So if either of you have any questions, you can type them out on the chat panel or on the Q&A panel.
Thanks, Neha. Are there any questions in the chat box?
Not as of now, Dr. Gupta. We'll probably give it a minute more and see if somebody does ask us something. I'm sure people must have some questions or probably not asking right away.
Okay, I can see a question that what is the role of ERAS in pediatric surgery? The role is very promising, and colorectal surgery, I am aware that they have already started adopting it. And also in various onco surgeries in pediatric age group, they have started adopting it. Basically, the protocol overall remains the same. It is just the adoption of it for the particular surgery, and the component which are more important are given more emphasis, and certain components are adopted and adapted according to the particular age group and particular type of surgery. Like minimally invasive surgery will be recommended, and for certain kind of procedures it may not be applicable, but it will always be kept in mind that wherever possible, then minimally invasive surgery would be promoted. Does that answer your question?
It does answer the question, Dr. Gupta. The person who asked the question has replied with thank you. And I would like to thank you for joining our webinar and giving this very useful session, ma'am. We will close this now. As of now, we don't have any more questions. We'll obviously stay in touch. I'll send you anything that comes along.
Neha, if we have the video, maybe we can play that and of the book.
Actually, I don't have the video handy with me. What we can do for the participants is we can probably share it when we share the actual recording link with them.
And before we close, I think about a lot of things go while going making a book, and redoing a book which is already a masterpiece is a challenge. And I must acknowledge efforts of Chandan. Chandan is there as a panelist, Miss Pooja and Sangeeta ma'am. So all of them were more than useful, and they actually helped a lot in the back end while managing the copy editing part and bringing the book to the final shape. I think Sangeeta ma'am is not here because I had interacted her with quite a bit, and she was very lot of things, because the final shape eventually depends upon the copy editing by the editing team at your site. So thank you to all of them.
Yes, we are very thankful to the whole Walter Kluwer team, which was instrumental in making it a success. So we are really thankful to all of you. Thank you very much for helping us out in achieving this dream.
And just
yeah.
one thing regarding the seminar. So see, so Anju talked about this audit part in ERAS. Actually, worldwide, they have done that audit, and penetration, you say, or acceptance of all the parameters is say not more than 60 to 70%. So what I'm trying to say is, so it is not easy to achieve a full 100% compliance of all the components of the protocol, but still whatever is feasible in the setup, considering it is a multidisciplinary decision involved, and you need to be in this close communication with the surgeons and the post-operative team. So whatever is feasible at the setup should be implemented for eventual good outcomes of the patient. So we should not be worried that we cannot do, say, 5 of the 10 of the protocol items and still, so we should not do it. Rather, we should be trying to focus on whatever is feasible and do those components, and gradually add up the components depending on the feasibility.
Okay, Neha, I can see one question about my email ID. Somebody wants my email ID. So my email ID is dranjugupt, dranjugupt09@gmail.com. I'm not able to type in the chat box, but I hope the person has noted it down. And also, I think you can share the participants.
Sure, I'll do that right away on the chat box. In fact, this is dranjugupta09@gmail.com, correct?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I've just sent that out. Thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you so much, sir. Your
Thank you.
contributions have been absolutely valuable. Thank you so much for this webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. I thank all the
Thanks,
participants also. Thank you very much.